Okay, welcome back to By Reason of Air Safety. In our last episode, we had Richard Fletcher and I speaking about the mess that the Aviation Technician Education Council, ACA, also known as ATEC, and its group of lawyers made of the aircraft maintenance technician trade. This week, we're going to look at how the effects of ATEC's ill-advised rewriting of the Part 147 regulations are already having a negative impact on the aircraft maintenance industry. Richard Fletcher is joining me again right after the introduction. So I'm Stephen Carbone, and this is By Reason of Air Safety. Okay, referring to our last, first of all, I'd like to welcome Richard Fletcher back. He's, you remember from the last episode, retired FAA inspector and foremost authority, I consider, on Part 147, working with Part 147s, but also on the rule rewrite.
Hey, appreciate you having me back.
It's glad to have you back. I really appreciate the time you're taking. So let me start off real fast and get back to one thing I'd like to cover from the last episode that I think needs a little bit more clarification. Referring to our last interview, when we spoke about the Allen study, and I'm going to show the Allen study up on the screen in a few seconds, was the proper data provided by the participants, such as the Aviation Technical Education Council, also known as ATEC, and others at the 2007 Part 147 rule rewrite. Did they provide the proper data for the what they wanted to add or retract from the regulations that you were rewriting?
Right. On this kickoff meeting we had, like I said in the last session, we set up as a group of FAA representatives and gave the audience or the attendees, many of them were from like ATEC and many were from just different schools and even some of the public, and we may have even had some from the aviation industry itself. But we gave them a question and answer period type deal, and every time they would bring up this wish list of suggestions like reducing the hours and things of that nature, we said, "Do you have any data to support this?" And we really never got a good answer from them. So at that meeting, there was no data presented. I can only assume that once the ARAC committee was formed, that they would eventually bring in this data to support what they're doing. And I always refer back to the Allen study. Back in 1965, when they put it all together, they brought in representatives from the airlines, from ATEC, they brought it in from the industry, as well as some of the schools, some of the major maintenance organizations, things of that nature. And they wanted to know, what does it take to make a good mechanic? What would the experience level need to be? The knowledge and skills, the basic knowledge and skills for a new certificated A&P. And they did this 3-phase, 5-year study, and they have 800 pages of data. Now, this data, you just showed it. You could get that Allen study if you want and read it, but this data showed them, okay, this is what the airline needs. This is what the general aviation needs. This is what the school needs to teach. So this is how we're all going to, and they all work together and they come up with this data, and they split the country into 6 regions and went out and did these studies. They had questionnaires, they had programs that they put together, and they would do trial runs on teaching and lesson structure and things of that nature, both in the classroom and in the shops. They put all that together, and that's how we got the Allen study, and that's where 147 originated. One thing you'll find in that Allen study, it said every time as the industry grows and technology grows, you need to reevaluate 147, which they did in 1990, and we got a new one in 1992. They came up with a 147 rewrite. Well, fast forward into this one, we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to get in, make everything work, and make it good. Now, I don't know what they did in the other rewrite, but they basically left 147 as it was. They just made some minor changes. When this ARAC group met together, I'm thinking if you had the data, and I'm only using logic here, but if you had the data to support the distance learning, the removing of hours, getting rid of FAA oversight, all of those things that they were wanting to do, they could have presented that. And they may have, but it wasn't enough to sway the FAA to go their direction.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say they didn't prevent the data or present the data, if they did, it wasn't something that was done through the industry and the FAA and them. I think it was just their I don't know, maybe through their experience or their knowledge in educational studies. I truly don't know, but I do know that they did not come up with any of the changes that they were asking for.
Right. When you're talking
So
about ATEC,
yeah,
I'm sorry. When you
well, I'm
uh,
talking about the ARAC. That rules
okay,
committee, everybody got together and they had to come to an agreement somehow, some way to get a rule change. And the only change that I had seen up to basically nearly up to COVID was they adjusted the times. They At one time the old 147 had the same amount of hours for airframe as they did power plant, and everybody found out, well, we need more time in airframe and not as much time in power plant. So they adjusted those kind of hours, but there were minor changes to 147.
mm-hmm.
It needed to be changed. It needed to have data to build. I mean, they had, get
Yeah,
5 more years of data. If you'd have done that, we should have had something around 2015 with the
right.
data to support what they want. None of that came about. So my thought is they didn't produce data satisfactory to the administrator to make the radical changes to 147 that they were wanting.
Right.
Then COVID
And
hits. We have this dead time, and then next thing you know, they get ATEC gets with Congress. The act comes out, and the FAA is forced into a rule, uh, and that's where we are right now with the new
right.
147.
Okay, and just to be clear, when we talk about ATEC, the Aviation Technical Education Council, are they involved in industry at all? Do they have any kind of active part in industry?
They have. I don't know if it's a direct active part. Uh,
It's not like an American Airlines
right.
or
I don't think they have meetings with American to say, "Hey, what can we do to help you?"
right. So whatever they approached the FAA with to change the rule to begin with in 2007 was their limited view of these are the people we're preparing to go into industry. They're not actually involved in industry to make
Right.
these calls as to what the industry needs.
Yeah.
So
I think
how
at
did
that
things
time
like
they were on that edge of they were trying to fill seats in their class. They weren't getting the students that they normally were getting. Um, when I went through Spartans, there were two shifts of students going through, a day shift and a night classes, and they were going all year long. I mean, they were starting new classes over and over and over again. And by the time I got into uh, the designee standardization branch in 2002, the numbers were dwindling, or I shouldn't say dwindling, they were reduced. They weren't quite
Mhm.
getting enough people. And we had schools that folded because they couldn't get interest, they couldn't get students. And then they started looking for ways to get interest back in because
Mhm.
probably prior to 2000, the majority of tests that were given by designated mechanic examiners were to people who qualified based on civil or military experience. It was like 75 to 25. I think I said this last time. By around 2000, it had already evened out, maybe even a little more, where they were graduates of school more because we just didn't have that many people in the military coming out and going into the aviation maintenance field. They were reducing.
Right.
And then really by 2007, when that ARAG meeting was going on, most of the DMEs were testing graduates of AMTS schools. So we saw the switch. There were more students being tested, but there weren't more students going to classes. In other words, yeah, we're teaching mostly, or we're testing mostly graduates, but the schools aren't putting out very many graduates. So our supply through the schools was not where it needs to be. It was on its slowly working its way up, and ATEC was looking for a way. We need to have it where we can have a lot more people going through. Because there is a need out there, and they
Mm-hmm.
needed to. They were looking for a way to streamline. I don't even know. I don't know the word I want to use. I don't know if I want to streamline, but
In
they found a better what they considered a better way to have somebody go through the certification process, especially
so
from the
so
school side.
right. So to be clear, there's generally three ways that an AMP gets into, for instance, an airline or working for a medical helicopter group. They can either go through an AMTS, an aircraft maintenance technical school. They can come in through the military and use their military experience, or they can work for a fixed base operator or somebody who has their own shop.
Right.
18 months for an airframe or power plant certificate, and 30 months for A and P, both airframe and power plant.
That's correct.
So what I'm trying to drive at is ATEC or the AMP school, the AMTS schools are not the only way in.
That's correct.
So when we talk about a mechanic shortage, what that means is that the military is not, people are not stepping out of the military into the civil life to pursue a career as maintenance. There are not enough people coming through doing their 30 hours, or there's not enough people and there's not enough people coming through an aircraft maintenance tech school.
Correct.
Just to jump back real quick,
Sure.
what did you mean by the change of hours?
Well, the minimum hours that were brought forth out of the Allen study, I believe it was 1,900 hours. Was it 750, 750, and 450? I think it was. And then
Okay.
they did a NPRM in 2015 to change it from something to the effect of 900 to 650. They added more. They took hours away from the requirement in the power plant courses and added them to the airframe. So the total number wasn't any different, but it
Mm-hmm.
was the amount of time you're going to spend in airframe in class and in shop was going to be more than the amount of time you would spend in power plant, which we all knew that needed to happen anyway because there was a lot more involved in the airframe as far as
Okay.
what we've been teaching. There's more subject areas in the two sections at that time. We had 44 subject areas, and there were more subject areas in airframe than power plant, and then power plant had more subject areas than general. And so
Right.
that's how they got into just adjusting the hours, which was probably not a bad idea, but they also needed a way to make the subject areas amendable to meet the industry. I mean, we were still
Mm-hmm.
doing dope and fab and round motors and welding, and we had all these, but they were set in the rule. They were in the appendices, but it was still, it's hard to change a rule. So
Right.
the idea was to move all of those out and just go by reference of another document that is changed, which they have done. That
Mm-hmm.
part, we knew that was coming because it needed to be. The rule needs to be a nice general rule that refers to something that, like in this case, the rule refers to the aircraft or Airman Certification Standard, the ACS, and it references by rule the ACS. Well, the ACS is easily changed. We can
Mm-hmm.
we can modify that to meet the industry needs, to bring in
Right.
new technology and take out things that may not be. The problem they got with the new ACS is I know I'm chasing a rabbit here, but they took out the teaching levels. Nothing
Right.
in current ACS says that you have to do any of these projects or any of this hands on projects to a return to service standard, which is what they're going to do as a mechanic in the field. So there's still some changes that need to be made in the ACS, but that was pretty good. That was something that had been talked about for years of doing. It's many of the other things that they just went strictly on their wish list. We can streamline, we'll control everything at the AMTS level,
Right.
and we'll feed the pipeline of mechanics with more.
Right. We'll be the sole source. We'll be the sole source. That's what they were looking for. Okay, and you said something just now. It was kind of interesting. You said about the rule writing process. I usually teach, and Richard and I teach for the FAA Academy. I always tell my students that when you change a rule, it's a 5x5 event in this time frame. That means it takes $5 million and 5 years to change the intent of a rule. So if you add a comma, you change and to or, whatever it is, 5 years, $5 million. If ATEC and whoever was participating in the rule rewrite in 2007, 5 years would have been 2012, 2015 at the latest. This could have been done if they had provided the data that the FAA was seeking to say, okay, this makes sense. We need to change the rule to reflect this. They didn't do that. So let me ask you this, Richard. Have the AMTS schools students numbers actually dropped so significantly to require a rule change, or are the airline numbers and repair station sizes actually gotten bigger and more complex?
I truly think it's the industry demand. They need more mechanics, and at the current rate, the schools can't run them through. They may only be able to pump through 100 a year. I'm throwing a weird number out. That may not even be close to what a school does. But if they ran a class and they could get 100 students a year through the system, and the system's demanding, the airline industry or the entire aviation industry needs 150. Well, they're looking for a way to get it up to 150. So let's streamline it. Let's make it an easier way to get 150 through the pipeline.
Right.
So there is demand out there. We're seeing record numbers of flying. Since COVID, man, airlines they're going crazy. I shouldn't say crazy. They're making money. They're putting out more airplanes. They're giving more flights. The problem with that, or I shouldn't even say it's a problem. It's a good problem to have. I need more mechanics, and they're having to go into an industry that they're having to find these mechanics because they want the best of the best, of course, the ones that they feel that they know and they can train. We're just not keeping up with that demand, because once you pull somebody out of I'm working for an executive, I'm a repair facility and I work on business jets, and my top 3 mechanics just went to an airline. Well, now they've got to find 3 more mechanics
and bring them up to speed.
Right.
Yeah, and bring them up to speed.
Right. Get them back up into, everybody wants to teach. When you get a mechanic in, I don't care what facility you're at. If you're at an executive FBO, or if you're at a repair station, or if you're at an airline, you get a mechanic in, I don't care what their experience is, they're still going to have to be trained to that company's way of doing business, as well as what they're going to be doing. What kind of airplane? I got to ensure this person can work on. I just don't, if they hired me and they said, okay, Fletch, you're going to come in here and you're going to work on these PT6 engines. Well, they're not just going to hand me a wrench and tell me go because I told them I could do that. I'm going to have to show myself that I can do that, that I don't have to be watched every waking moment that I'm on an airplane.
And that you can return it, to service.
And I can return it to service. That's the scariest part about the mechanic coming right out of the school. They too can return to service. They can follow the stuff on, the requirements from Part 65. What are their privileges? Well, it says if they're doing maintenance if they're properly rated for airframe and power plant, there's things they could do on an airframe, things they can do on a power plant, and they can return it to service. Now, we do have some currency requirements, or they have to have done it before or have been trained, or they can show the administrator, the FAA, that they can do this job. The problem is, I don't know how many, in all the years I was an aviation safety inspector, never once was I ever asked to evaluate a person to see if they could actually do the maintenance that they were doing. It all came about on as my normal oversight routine. I would may see somebody out working on an airplane and say, "Hey, what have you done? Have you done it before?" But even then, the burden of proof is on the FAA to prove that that person actually doesn't have the experience. We have no way of doing it. Mechanics don't keep records on what they do.
Right.
Everybody else does. Pilot does. Parachute rigger, they've got to keep a logbook of everything they do and keep it for 2 years.
Yep.
It'd be real nice if they kind of expanded that into the mechanic. And I know a lot of mechanics going, "Are you kidding? All they're going to do is use it against me." It also can be, it's only for the work performed. It can also save you from getting into trouble as well.
Yeah, it's to their benefit.
It is far to their benefit. Yeah. But there's no regulation that requires it, so they're not going to do it.
Okay, one of the aspects of this interview that we've been trying to point out was when ATEC went to change the rule, and they did it by bypassing the normal rule writing process, which invites industry to get part of the rule change. That's why it costs so much, $5 million, 5 years,
right?
Because people have the right to comment, they have right to bring evidence, they have right to bring data to change the rule. The problem is the FAA and the FARs, the Federal Aviation Regulations, were not the path to doing what ATEC wanted. It was just an easy path to go to Congress and take advantage of the COVID event to force a rule change. In reality, the FAA doesn't have the authority to dictate to, say, American Airlines how many mechanics you have to have. It doesn't have, the FAA doesn't tell the American Airlines how many pilots you have to have. They can't tell them how many airplanes you have to have or what routes they fly. So the FAA and the FARs were not the path ATEC should have taken, because the FAA has no control or authority over an airline's commerce. So if an airline doesn't have enough mechanics, the FAA can't do anything about that. They can only make sure that the mechanics that are at American Airlines or United, whoever, are doing their job safely. So it's not the FAA's responsibility, or let me ask you, is it the FAA's responsibility to increase those technician numbers that were called out by the mechanic shortage?
The only way we could ever do that as the FAA would be is if we saw that safety was an issue and somehow, but in order to do that, we would almost have to circumvent our own rules, because right now there's a certain amount, there's a certain procedure you have to go through in order to get certificated. And we can't get rid of that. We'd have to do a rule rewrite. And what did we say? 5 million, 5 years. I mean, we could get Congress to come in and mandate that we change everything, but is safety going to be involved? Is there going to be an influx of highly untrained, unskilled mechanics going out into the workforce? Because everybody here that's watching and that has worked in any kind of a facility, you get a new person that doesn't know anything, you got to keep a pair of eyes on them for a while. You got to make sure they're doing it right. Matter of fact, we want them to be supervised. That's fine. Mm-hmm. That's an apprentice program. That's a great idea. And many of them have found out to do that. There are several large repair stations that they have great apprentice programs. There's one here in Oklahoma. You hire on, you'll work for them half a day, and then you go over to one of the 147 schools nearby, and they'll pay for you to go through school. So you come in and you're under an apprenticeship program. You go through a 147, you get your certificate, and you work for them. And what they do is they say, we'll walk you through this program, but you got to stay with us for 3 years. And they sign them under contract. We'll help pay for your A&P. You stay with us. That way they control a lot of but they put that that request out there, and there were no takers, not hardly any. It's just that we're having this need that's from the industry, and the FAA. I know we're here to promote safety and even improve commerce, but we can't do it in a way that could have safety effect, detrimental safety effects on the flying community. People working on airplanes that just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, really, the need for more mechanics, I see it as a combined. The FAA needs to get involved, just like with the Allen study. It needs to be industry, FAA, and the schools.
Yeah. They
They
have
all
the
three
three of
need.
the. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, everybody needs to come to a consensus on how can we resolve this issue, because it's there.
Yeah. So we've established that the three entities, the schools, the FAA, and the industry, and that includes airlines, rotorcraft, anybody who has wings or rotors and flies,
Right.
has to get together to figure out what the problem is. It was not the job of anyone to bypass the NPRM process, because when ATEC did that, they left everybody else out of the process to change, to work that rule. And that 147 rule, just like 65, we were talking about part 65, subpart D as in Delta, has been altered to meet ATEC's needs, not the industry's. So one of the problems that we have about this is ATEC thinks that they are smarter than the industry, and that they know better. That they thought that they were smarter than the industry, and they knew better than to let industry tell them what to do. What we are now starting to do is, as Richard brought out in the last episode, was we are starting to see the collection of data from ATEC's changes to the rule, and we're going to start to see things that are coming up that may be good or maybe unsafe for the future, and means it's going to take 5 years and $5 million to undo what ATEC did. Two of the episodes that I wanted to talk about took place a long time ago, but it's an example of how a poorly run AMTS, Aircraft Maintenance Technical School, and what they were putting out. Can you go into a little bit, Richard, about St. George?
Yes. St. George was in Florida. The FAA discovered after about 1,800 certificates at issue. Actually, I think it's closer to 2,500, somewhere in that, between 18 and 25, where St. George, as a DME, just you come in and you hand him a check and an application, and then he turns around and issues you a temporary certificate on the spot. So you got your A&P right here. And if anybody asks, tell them it took a long time and it was a hard test. And out he'd go. And he was doing people, not only graduates of schools, because many of the schools were, they were pretty tough back in those days. And there were a lot of graduates that were real hesitant about going out and taking their oral and practical tests, feeling that they may not be fully prepared. We all did. Graduating from schools is a little scary to go out and take that writtens and then the oral and practical. St. George found a way just to, we'll make it all simple. I think you're good enough, and let them go. We had to retest, I believe, when we put out an order or a memorandum where once we found out about St. George after the fact, we went back and found all the certificates that they issued, and I think they did retesting of about half of them. You move back forward. Now this was in the 80s. You move up into the 90s. I think from 92 to 98, I think it was. We had another one, Mr. Tobias, another DME, doing the same thing, and he was actually in working in with a computer testing center so that they could get their written test done, and they could go and take their oral and practical, which was, again, give me the check and your application. I'll fill the paperwork out. Here's your temporary. If anybody asks any questions, just tell them it was a hard test and it took all day. Because in those days, the oral and practical for both an A and P, it took usually more than one day. Usually took, for a full A and P, it was 2 to 3 days. I think they said you can't go more than 4 events in a 4-day period. So you're going to have to get it done in 4 days. And some of them, they got pretty close to that. We see that some were very good test takers and all that. But back to St. George and Tobias, they recognized the insecurities of graduates for the most part, and people even coming in with that had authorization from the military. They just saw that they we found that they advertised, you bring your stuff, we'll make sure you get your certificate. And it was just an easy way for them to get. We of the, I think we've done about 2,000 on the Tobias retest, and I know most of them, many of them passed, but many of them did not. But both of those were the result of trying to meet the demand, because we've got companies out there that need AMPs, and they would send them to St. George and send them to Tobias. And Tobias was getting people coming up. He was in San Antonio. He was getting people coming up out of Mexico. And he would just, as soon as they come in, he'd take their money, write them a temporary, send them out the door, and then shred the paperwork. So we've got people sitting down south of our border that have temporary airman certificates, and after 120 days, it's dead in the water. But if you don't know that, they're going to be using that as their authorization to sign, and they're just, I don't know what's going to ever happen to them. I don't know. We have no idea how many of those he actually did. Oh, go ahead.
They could be signing off on U.S. registered aircraft that are in repair stations outside the U.S.
It could be they may have gotten their position in that facility just because they have that temporary in their back pocket. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me just harp on this a second. When we say that somebody has 2,000 people under Tobias and how many hundreds under St. George, when we talk about having to pull their certificate or retest them, does the work that they have done in the period between getting that certificate and being retested, is that all suspect?
It is. The problem we had, the FAA lawyer said the burden of proof, again, is on the FAA to prove that what they did was no good. Even though technically it was contrary to the regulation, but we would have to show that that's about all we could get, is you were not properly certificated and you didn't meet the requirements. It was, I think the FAA lawyers determined the easiest way to do it is just to retest them, and if they pass, go ahead and no harm, no foul. I believe there were several from St. George and from Tobias that had gone on to get their IA certificates. So now you're talking annuals that have been done and things of that nature. I believe there was just too much to take on, and where we'd have to go and have an aircraft re-inspected, or it would have to be called out and proven. Yeah, this person did this maintenance. It was contrary to the guidance. It was contrary to the FAA guidance or the manufacturer's guidance or whatever. We would still have to go out there and prove it. And when you start talking 3,000 people, we don't have that many inspectors that can go out and dedicate themselves to tracking all that down. I mean, that would have taken just about the entire workforce to go out there and try and prove this. And it's almost unprovable.
Yeah.
Because if they had done work on it, I changed the leading edge slat. I changed the ball bearings on that leading edge slat that goes back and forth, and then someone else comes along later and changes it again. Well, we can't see if that was done bad the first time. We'd say, well, why'd you change it again? Well, it was making a noise, and the book says you got to change it out. So, could have been bad bearing or just bad maintenance.
The tracks were covered. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The tracks were covered. Yeah.
It was just difficult.
And in keeping with that idea, has aircraft technology, the improvements such as the evolution of digital aircraft with self-analysis, and from the 90s, the onboard analytical systems, have these improvements made made technical schools better or worse? I mean, they changed what the technical school is required to teach?
Well, the technical school, we gave them 44 subject areas, and now the ACS is 40 subject areas. And the
Mm-hmm.
schools can incorporate that information in there. If 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 I'm working in a 147 school, and many of my mechanics are in hopes of going over to the airlines, I may, and the school has this ability to do so, add courses. We have
Mm-hmm.
147s that have avionics packages. You can go and get your avionics. Some have added non-destructive testing. You can go get a level 3 NDI, things like that. But that's above and beyond the minimums that we required. So schools don't, that I know of, they're not really going into current expansion to meet the needs of the industry. For example, there's a 147 in Wichita, and Cessna gave them one of the diesel. I think it's a 172 diesel, but they gave them one to help teach the students. Here's some new technology coming out from Cessna, and they were working in conjunction with the school, and they gave them an airplane so that these students could get hands-on experience. The advanced students, that were later on getting close to graduation time, and in the power plant course, here they are working on an aircraft diesel. I always used to
Yep.
make fun of them because they always had mud flaps on the tires, and and you always say kick her back to the tower,
There
that
you
kind of.
go.
You had to, and wear your ball cap backwards or sideways.
Breaker, breaker,
Breaker,
breaker,
breaker,
breaker.
tower. Where we
There you go.
going? Yeah, get her done. But it was a
But
great
is it? But
idea.
are these technological advancements, are they necessary in an AMTS school?
It depends. Composite has made
Okay.
surges forward, and many of the schools brought in composite. And they would do pre-pregs, and they would introduce them to basic knowledge. Some have even stepped above that. So we're going to do a pre-preg, and we're going to do a repair, and then we're going to put it in an autoclave, and everybody will be happy. They're going to do real work, give them hands-on. But there was no consistent requirement, no
Right.
consistency whatsoever, no standardization. So it was really up to the 147 to determine, how am I going to meet this need? It's there. I mean, now we've got composites that are inlaid with fiber optics.
Yeah.
You I know it right now. It's mostly in a military function, but it's going to, for weight and all that. Why not put it in the industry, out in general aviation when it hits out there? Who can work on it? Because
Mm.
when composite first hit Boeing and all them, they wouldn't let. You had to be a certified repair station. You're not going to be just some mechanic out there. You had to have specific training. You had to use their specifications for repairs and any of that. You couldn't just do it based off of some standard, 4313 kind of a deal. You had to
Right.
use Boeing's data.
Right. An AMTS is just teaching students the fundamentals, right?
Right.
I know we talk about, for instance, dope and fabric repairs and things like that, which I think there might be maybe a handful of airplanes that actually use dope and fabric anymore that are operated part 135 or whatever.
Right.
But the whole point of an AMP school or an AMTS school is to teach the student the fundamentals of operating, of maintaining an aircraft safely. It's not to teach them the latest 787 or A350 technology. It's to give them the basics so
Right.
that they can expand from that. Because when they get to that airline, like you said before, the airline is going to have to teach them how to do what they are requiring them to do, which kind of brings me to another topic real quick, of what we're seeing today. For instance, last year, Delta had a 757 taxiing in Hartsfield, Atlanta Airport when the nose tire came off. The pilots in the 757 didn't know the nose tire came off. Another aircraft taxiing behind them said your tire came off and went into the the rain reservoir bay. A United 777 flying out of San Francisco had a main tire fall off on climb out. The tire came off of the axle and then bounced around in the parking lot for the airport. And then, of course, unfortunately, two Delta mechanics in Hartsfield Atlanta Airport were killed when they did something that was basically fundamental. They were killed when they were trying to disassemble a tire that had just come off another aircraft. Now, for those who don't understand, changing a tire in an airline is about as basic as you can get. You take the tire off, you put a new tire on, you torque it down, you lock it in, and good to go. What you do with the tire when you come off is you deplete the dry nitrogen that's in there, so that the tire is not under any pressure. In fact, you use the tire pressure to raise the jack up on the air. But also, when you put that tire to disassemble it, you put it in a cage. You first make sure that it's depressurized, and then you have a cage that prevents any kind of residual pressure from exploding that tire out. Well, this tire was obviously very pressurized, had its right pressure on there for operation, and killed two people who didn't disassemble it right. So what we're starting to see is in the industry, and I'm talking about just 3 incidents out of how many that are not reported in the GA or the 135 world, we're starting to see a lot of problems come up. I took a flight where it took 2.5 hours to service the hydraulics for a DC-9. Now, it takes normally 20 minutes to service hydraulics on a DC-9, and that's with a 10-minute break. It takes like about 10 minutes to do that.
That's right.
So why are these fundamental problems starting to show up? What is your impression, Richard?
I think a lot of it has to be. I see several things. The lack of, I want to call it a healthy fear of what can hurt you with aviation. Tires, for example, pulling a tire off of a transport category aircraft. Rule number 1: don't move it until it's deflated. You pull that core out, you make sure that thing is completely, or make your adjustment, your straighter or whatever, but you make sure it's completely empty. Those are things not because so much as you're trained, but you're trained because it's a safety issue. It can kill you if you don't do it. And in fact, it has taken some life. It's things of that nature. I think the airlines also have gotten to the point, well, we've got them in here, we've gave them training and basic, and they stop. They don't keep reminding people of the dangers. If you see somebody out there rolling a tire back and it's still inflated, you got to go out there and give them the what for. How can you move this with this? You're endangering other people. I always, when people ask me, why do you work on aircraft and stuff like that, and what's your mindset? And I said, my mindset has always been, I'm going to work on this airplane, and my grandmother's going to get on that thing and go fly. So I wanted to do the very best I could. And so I think some people, they get complacent. I don't know if it's just they don't care. I truly, there are people out there, and they really don't pay attention to what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's a lack of training or a lack of focus, but we're seeing things now, uncontained engine failures. My goodness, when you're doing internal work on an engine, that's meticulous work. It takes your full concentration. You got to do it right. If you're cutting corners, or if you're just going close enough for government work and you're slapping stuff together, we're getting uncontained. It's just out there. It keeps looking like no one's really paying attention. Right. Am I making sense there? No one's really focusing on what they're doing, the job at hand, the task at hand. You've got step 1 to step 12. You got to do all 12 steps, and you need to make sure all are done correctly. And I don't see that going out there.
Yeah.
to
And
get.
I think you bring up a good point is when people, my audience may think that I'm trying to shoot ATEC down again and say, hey, ATEC, this is your fault because these people are unqualified to do this. That's not exactly what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is when you depend upon the airlines to train into whether it's a former military, whether it's a person who learned on the 30 hours of hands-on, or you're going through an AMTS school. If you think that the airlines are going to train that safety fundamentals that you're supposed to learn in school into you in the airlines, there's 3 examples among many that that's not happening, and I can give you several more, which were causes of accidents. All right, Air Midwest 5481 back in 2003, January 2003, was the root cause was improper training of the people who were doing an elevator rig. For the Colgan 9446 was operating Part 91, but it was a Colgan Airlines Beech 1900D. They took they reversed the trim on the elevator trim and caused the aircraft to nose down instead of when the pilots fed nose up into the trim wheel. So the plane crashed, because killing both pilots because the trim cable was installed backwards. Again, improper training. They didn't have somebody qualified to change out that cable that was up on the tail of the aircraft. Alaska Airlines 1282, even though the NTSB came out with a report, they were not able to determine who put that door on that came off in flight. Was it Spirit Aerospace or was it Boeing? It was never determined. So now we have a problem between one or the other has a problem with proper training. And then you have, right now, we're looking at UPS 29076, the UPS MD-11 that crashed in Louisville last month, in November. And it's looking like, as far as I'm concerned, and I don't know if Richard, you'd agree with me, this is an improper poor pylon inspection as part of a phase check inspection where the pylon was not properly inspected using whatever NDT process they had used. That's where it's looking. It doesn't look like a design because 35 years into operation, it's not likely a design issue. It's probably a maintenance issue. So we're starting to see these things, partially because they're not learning the fundamentals, and partially because they are not being trained by the operator. For accidents that didn't hit the airlines, accident number Charlie Hotel India 05 Foxtrot Alpha 038. I'll show this on the screen. Was in Chesterfield, Missouri, was a Part 135 corporate jet, crashed in a river due to, like Colgan 9446, a reverse trim. It crashed right out of maintenance. Again, another one, Charlie Hotel India 08. Mike Alpha 270 is the accident number. It was in Columbus, Ohio. It was a Convair CV 580, where it crashed in a cornfield right out of maintenance due to a reverse trim. Almost 5 years to the date that Colgan Airlines crashed one because of reverse trim. So we're not even learning for maintenance why these accidents are happening, because the NTSB doesn't have anybody who's qualified in maintenance to be doing the reporting. I could give you thousands of examples. Those 2 accidents I just described never hit the headlines because it wasn't a major accident. So, but they are happening because of things that are the fundamentals that are learned in A&P schools or the military or on the line are not being translated. So, getting back to the FAA as the oversight agency in what was changed by ATEC on the 147 rules, should the FAA be more, Richard? Should the FAA be more involved than ATEC has decided by the rule change?
Oh yeah, ATEC has taken on the rule of the FAA when it comes post certification. will, especially if a school is accredited, the FAA is almost out of the picture. Even if we go into the school, which they have to let us in, and we do our surveillance and things, and sit in a classroom, we'll look stuff over, but we have no parameters in the rule or anything where it says you shall not, thou shalt not, do not do. We don't have any of that anymore. It's all in guidance, and it's controlled by them. They're going to be the ones doing the oversight for the accredited school. They're going to look at the curriculum. They're going to look at all the toolings and stuff. All that they're going to do with the FAA from the school's standpoint is just kind of notify they when they get a chance, hey, we got some new equipment. We're doing this. I mean, the old rule said if you change locations without telling the FAA 10 days prior to the move, you've revoked your own certificate. Your certificate is revoked. They took all that out. And now the rule is very much FAA is we're way back in looking at it, and ATEC feels that they can do all of the oversight, everything they need to do to keep this school within the regulatory requirements, which really aren't that much. What they're doing now with the ODA is that not only do they want to get involved in the teaching portion, they also want to be in control of the testing portion. So you go through the school, and then the school will make sure you get tested properly under the organizational designee authorization for a 147 school. Now, I don't know exactly how they're going to have this because it's brand new and they're still writing the parameters on what that's going to look like. But FAA oversight will still be going in and making sure unit members are trained and they're going to follow what their guidelines are for ensuring that they're going to be putting out quality mechanics, but it still falls under the 147.25 testing results that are going to be a 3-year window. 70% of the people that take their test pass. It's a very weak standard, to say the least, but even if we find that they're under 70, there's nothing in the rules what we can do about it. We can't go in and say, okay, well, work with us here or do something in that, because ATEC wants that control. Or when I say ATEC, the 147s want that control, but ATEC is involved in most of the 147 schools out there, most of the AMTS, which is fine. If they want to take that over, we need to have overall where we can go in and step in, but FAA involvement has to be there. We're the ones ensuring safety. The school, they're the ones that need to get more students out. We want more money. We want more students so we can make more money. I get it. I'm all for that. But don't do it at what cost?
What's being sacrificed at that?
That's exactly right. And FAA is supposed to be there to make sure there's nothing being sacrificed. We can have more people go through classes, more schools, graduates. We just need to we need to make sure that they're doing it in accordance with our guidelines, in accordance with the rule, in accordance with ACS and industry standards. The industry has a say in this, and we've left them completely out in the cold. Nobody. This has all been, this rule change is ATEC and Congress. Yeah. And Congress,
two entities that have no idea what's going on.
That kind of scared me more than anything. Congress will come in and we'll take care of this. No, you shouldn't.
No, please don't.
Yeah,
please don't.
Please don't.
We're fine.
Step away from the airplane. Yeah, exactly. So it is a deal. I just fear that we've given away too much without actually staying with some good oversight. Because I don't mind. I truly don't. I've seen FAA inspectors. I've taught 147 certification for many years, and I have run across FAA inspectors that their office just doesn't put an emphasis on the 147 school. And they don't have enough experience with a school to do really good oversight. They don't have the time, for one thing, because the FAA won't put the resources in. So FAA has got to look to fault in this as well. They need to step up. There's several things they could do. They could have just a dedicated group that all they're going to look at is ODAs, anybody that's a designee. That's all they're going to look at. Because the designee is doing a function on behalf of the FAA. The DME tests thousands of mechanics every year because we don't have the workforce or the equipment to do the test ourselves. When I say ourselves, I'm talking the FAA. The FAA doesn't have the personnel, the equipment, or the time to do all the oral and practical tests that are out there. So we let the designee do it. When the designee is doing that test, when they're performing that oral and practical test, they're basically stand-in FAA inspectors. They represent the administrator when they're doing their job function. The ODA, the organization, is going to be the exact same way. When they are doing the function for the FAA, they are representing the FAA, and they should be held to a higher standard.
Right.
In order to do that, we have to have FAA personnel that can do oversight of those, proper oversight. And if we don't have that, we've left a weak link in the chain, and we're not going to do anybody any good service. We're going to be pumping out a lot more mechanics, but there's a good chance many of them may not be up to par. They're not going to be ready to go into the industry.
Right. So, Richard, solutions.
Oh, like I just told you, I need more FAA involvement. Dedicated ASIs that are going to be doing the oversight. More training will also be required of the FAA. Then I've talked about put the teeth back in the regulation. 91 is full of operating rules. If you do this, if you're going to operate this, everybody's got to be like this. It's got to be like that. If you don't, something's going to happen. We're either going to suspend your certificate, we're going to revoke your certificate, we're going to fine you, stuff like that. Even if more egregious, we may even, take you, send you over to the U.S. codes. But we have to have the teeth. We have to have the ability to do the oversight and to regulate. Then we've got to make it where it costs too much if you do wrong. St. George, that's a pretty stiff price he paid. He went to prison. Tobias didn't go to prison, but he lost everything. We took everything he had. If he's in aviation again, I'd be surprised. But they considered sending him to prison. Just make it where it's not worth it to go against the rules. Then we have to do we need to redo the certification requirements. And I may be preaching, getting on my soapbox here, but I believe if you go through whatever school you want to go through, or go through and take your oral and practice, get your basic certificate, I think we need to do like other countries have adopted. Europe, the UK, EASA, UK, Canada, Australia, they all have, when you get through the school, you get your first certificate. It's a basic certificate that lets you work on 12.5 and below, 450. In Canada, it's the M1 and the M2 class, and it's an AME in Australia. But it's after you go to school, then you're an apprentice for a few years, and then you take the big test that gets you your full certification. If you do that, the industry is going to have to pony up and pay, because right now, it's time get you in. Well, after a few years, we're going to give you raises and this and that, and there's places to promote in this. Fine, but we need to get the new ones in to where we can train them as an apprentice, certificated. They can have some certain authorizations and allowabilities, but in my opinion, they need to redo this certification process. Not like that fiasco, what was it, Part 66, where they were going to do transport category airframe and general aviation airframe and power plant and transport category IA. I said, transport category? Who came up with that? They had the right idea. Break it down. I'd love you to get a basic certificate, and then let's say you go work on a 777. for a couple of years, and then or even a year and a certain amount of time, and get experience. By you come and take a test and have that added to your certificate. That's
Right.
incentive to go out and get further education, further experience, because you're going to get more money. With the more ratings you have, the more money you got. Same with the engine. Start out with 450 horsepower or less combustible engine or recip engine. I go out and I get my PT6, get some training, get some experience, take the test, have PT6 added to my certificate.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that is a benefit. That it's what their other that way they can streamline and add more. We can make it a more basic 147 to get them through, and then they grow from there. And then the last, like I say, the aviation industry is going to have to pay more. Start them out, and then give them that incentive. And pay is always a nice little thing to do. And the aviation industry is hurting right now because there's just not enough people. We've got this age gap between the old timers that know everything, and then these new guys are coming in. You talked about how those guys cross those. They put
The cables backwards.
yeah, put them
Yeah.
backwards. Where was the old timer going? Whoa, yeah, whoa, whoa, whoa! You did this backwards. Where was that guy
Yeah.
that has done it a
Yeah.
thousand times? They're not there. They what we've allowed. Well, I can't say we've allowed it. The industry, a lot of the people are retiring, and there's a huge gap of experience in our industry right now. And we just need a way to keep that where it's steadily. When 10 go out, 10 come in, kind of a deal. And I see those are some of the things. Now these are all my opinions, but I see
Well,
them as
that's what
being
I'm asking.
something that has worked in other countries. And we used to be the leaders, and now I think we're second fiddle right now. The A&P, we've given them a whole bunch of authority, but it's not necessary. We can control that. We can say, well, as you get better and more into your career, you get more responsibility. We'll add ratings and do things of that nature, and create qualified mechanics as they're going through careers. We advance them as well, and it will help with technology as well. Once technology is advancing,
Yeah.
so will the mechanic.
Yeah.
And then we don't have to worry so much about teaching all that. We can introduce it in the 147. That's great. That's sounds like a great program.
Yeah.
And then you can go outcome based through a 147 all you want, because once they get certificated and go in, they're going to have a baseline to start at and grow from there. We just don't throw them in the mix and expect everything to happen. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay.
That's why I asked.
Well, I was just, I didn't want anybody to answer. What are the words coming out of the boy's mouth?
That's all right. Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming back.
No problem.
And
It's my pleasure.
and okay, it was great interviewing you. I hope my audience, the listeners in here, especially the people in the aircraft maintenance industry, start to understand what this whole rewrite is leading to. I think this has been kind of an awakening for a lot of people to see exactly what has transpired. So when we look at this aircraft mechanic shortage, it becomes obvious that ATEC's attempt to alter the regulations was not a good idea to begin with. Why? Because in their arrogance, they believed they knew the aviation industry better than the industry and better than the FAA. And they approached it by attacking the regulations instead of cooperating with industry and the FAA to come up with a more reasonable solution. The aircraft technician shortage was not due to just a drop in school attendance. It was due to declines in military to civilian numbers, a rise in retiring aircraft technicians, an unexpected increase in air operators, and an unexpected increase in repair stations and overhaul facilities that needed to be fed more aircraft mechanics. The drop in aircraft technician numbers wasn't an FAA problem. It was an industry problem. It was the industry's responsibility to plan for a pending aircraft maintenance shortage by adapting. Many airlines did adapt. My former airline was one. And these airlines now enjoy the benefit of a strong aircraft maintenance workforce while everybody else is looking for help. The choice to increase fleet sizes, expand routes, operate wide-body aircraft, add repair station certifications, add mechanics and pilots, all of these are commerce issues. That's an airline's responsibility. Safety is the FAA's. The FAA never restricts an air operator's expansion because it's commerce. The FAA only gets involved when safety is on the line. Now, ATEC attacked the integrity of the federal aviation regulations, and ATEC attacked the safety responsibilities of the only U.S. aviation safety agency, the FAA. Why? Because ATEC misread the causes of the AMT shortage. Because ATEC tried to lecture the aviation industry and the FAA on what ATEC didn't understand and could not prove with data. Because ATEC forced a 147 rule change to benefit aircraft maintenance schools financially. And because ATEC was able to manipulate an organization more ignorant than themselves, namely the United States Congress. ATEC and their collaborators in this Title 14 CFR Part 147 fiasco have made aviation unsafe because they chose to push their mess onto other aviation organizations for them to clean up. And as a result of ATEC's interference in matters they didn't understand, it is believed air operators will likely not hire too many people from an A&P school in the future. Well, that is at least is my impression. Why? Because during a mechanic shortage, the airlines don't have the time, the patience, the resources, or the money to retrain A&P candidates in safety specialized concepts they were supposed to learn in AMTS schools. So I hope I'm wrong when I say this to the Part 147 students of the future. When you have your A&P certificate, your costly school loans, and no job, you can thank ATEC for making that all possible. Until next time, I am Stephen Carbone, reminding you to tab. Think safe, act safe, be safe. God bless.